Use a chumash too. That's the question.
You got a bench almost for Reed. She had mine.
What?
She was in the hospital.
Why would they do that? They took away all the Parsha.
How are you?
Okay. I'm okay. I'm good. Eden's all right. What happened to Eden?
Yeah, she thought she had leukemia. It was a disaster.
What?
Yeah, it turned out she had like a spleen with the whole thing. It's her mono.
It's in the rabbinate. I need a chumash just for a minute.
You need a chumash?
Do me a favor, so Jim.
Sure.
Go find one of the maintenance people, any of them, and tell them in Spanish, I need 25 chumashim of the red books, okay?
Okay.
Good morning, Boker Tov. Boker Tov, Boker Tov. Boker Tov. Good morning. It's good to see you all. Welcome back. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. It's really good to see all of you. And Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Shirah. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So it's Sabbath of Song. Last night we had a very beautiful musical service with Navat Tehillah. Very special service. Following our learning together, there's a meditation session here in the chapel, and in the Sher Lapati chapel, you'll find service this morning is dedicated to all those who've been volunteering for the synagogue and for the community. So there'll be aliyahs for people to volunteer work in all sectors of the community and to honor their service to the community. So come on down, and then there are chili rellenos for lunch. And then following that, Parsha. We are the only synagogue in America that serves chili rellenos. I'd like to welcome the Shafton family back to their gullus. It's wonderful to have you here. Mazal tov on your engagements and your simchas, and we're delighted to have you here. Delighted that you have a place in our community. I want to once again wish Mort happy birthday. It was a wonderful simcha this week to celebrate your birthday, okay? Mazel tov, many, many, many more. You're on a roll here, you know. You know what they say? The first 102 are the hardest. After that, it's downhill, babies. You're on a roll. The Resnick family's looking for kosher food near Disneyland. If anybody knows you can order kosher TV dinners. You know, what we always did is stop, at Pico Deli and take a bag of sandwiches and camp outside the park. So, but if anybody knows a better way to do kosher food at Disneyland, let us know, okay, right? What are the other things this week? Those are the things this week. It's this coming week, Monday, of course, we're all off for celebrate Martin Luther King. Wednesday night, College of Jewish Studies commences, and our guest is going to be Dr. Julian Bull. Julian is my neighbor, actually. He's the headmaster of the Campbell Hall Episcopal School. He's a Reverend Canon in the Episcopal Church, priest in the Episcopal Church. He's going to talk to us about a thinking Christian's faith. And he's also going to talk to us about religious education, how religious education teaches young people of this generation God and religion. So it's a wonderful conversation on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, and it's free and the cookies are good. Sorry? Everything's streamed these days, yeah. In fact, I'll talk about that in a second. So
although this session wasn't streamed last week, we tried.
Really? Yeah. It wasn't? What happened?
We're asking you.
What happened? What happened? I'm sorry. I apologize for that. All right. So last week we met with Rabbi Slater, Rabbi Johnny Slater, who taught us a piece of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, a great Hasidic rabbi. And by coincidence, on Wednesday night, as part of the series, we met with Rabbi Eli Rifkin, who is the rabbi of the Chabad of Northridge, a very, very articulate speaker. And he talked to us about Hasidut, about Hasidus. So I thought we would continue that trend and continue to talk about Hasidic tradition. And I brought you a great Hasidic rabbi who will reflect on the Parsha. But let's take a moment before we get to that to talk about the sort of history and development of this phenomenon called Hasidism or Hasidut, or as the rabbi said on Wednesday night, Hasidus. Okay, that's the Ashkenazic version. Thank you. Just set them down and we'll pass them out. Thank you so much. We have a Chumashim for anybody. Let me just take one from you if that's okay. Thank you so much. Okay? This is going to take a moment, so just try to follow this, okay? 1492, Columbus sails, and Jewish civilization on the Iberian Peninsula comes to an end. We'd been in Spain since Roman times, and the flowering of Spanish Jewish civilization had taken place over the previous 700 years. Thank you so much. But in 1492, the Spanish government, look, put those over here so they'll be on there. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. That's great. Spanish Jewish civilization comes to an end. Ferdinand meets Isabel, and they unite the Christian kingdoms of Spain, of Castile and Aragon, and as a wedding present, they kick out the Jews and steal all of their property. This was a traumatic event for the Jews who had been left in Spain because it was a great civilization. Thank you. Thank you. This had been a great civilization. It's like the emperor's new clothes, and like the sorcerer's apprentice, right? If I don't figure out the spell, we're going to be... Thank you. That's funny. Thank you. Remember the sorcerer's apprentice? Yeah. Like, if I don't figure out the spell, there'll be books to the ceiling. That's an interesting... It was a terrifying thing because they had been such a glorious civilization, and Jews had been so prominent in government and in the powerful circles of Spain that when they suddenly found themselves helpless in front of this prospect of exile, it was a tremendous spiritual blow. Jews spread all over the Mediterranean, many to Italy, North Africa, and a very small community went to Israel, to Palestine. And in particular, a very small community found their way to the northern Israelite city of Tzfat, S-A-F-E-D in English, Tzfat in Hebrew. Tzfat was actually a decent-sized mercantile city. It was a textile trade for in that area. And what happens in that area is you have a sudden concentration of mystics. Now, mysticism has always been part of Judaism, as it has been part of every civilization, every religious civilization. But mysticism was always practiced in private, always quiet, always very, very underground. For the first time, you have a public community of mystics. So you could walk the streets of Tzfat and hear mystical truths being preached in all the synagogues of Tzfat. Come in, please, please, please. Now, just stop for a moment. Mysticism, let's define it. Mysticism is the seeking, the aspiration of a personal experience of the divine, a personal experience of God. Now, each of those words is important. Because it's a personal experience, I mean, all religion is an aspiration to know God, but religion sets up certain communal structures for doing this. We have davening, we have mitzvot. In the church, you have communion. In Islam, you have the Hajj, and you have the prayers of the mosque. But in mysticism, what the mystic seeks to do is circumvent the traditional sources of knowledge of God and follow their own special path. And for that reason, mystics were considered somewhat subversive, because you're not following the rules. You're not on the regular pathway toward God. You're going your own way. The second piece is it's not simply a knowledge about God or a knowledge of God. It's a personal experience of God. In certain traditions, it's an intimacy with God, even a union with God. This is the highest form of religious experience, to come face to face to God, become part of the God. Again, this is subversive to traditional religion. So what happens is in many religions, for example in Islam, the Sufi tradition, which is the mystical department of Islam, is persecuted because it undermines the authority of the traditional faith. In Judaism, we never felt the need to do that. Just like in Judaism, it's really hard to be a heretic. Right now, we've had our heretics, but usually it's more political than religious. Because in Judaism, we are tied together by more than simply faith. We're tied together by ethnic bonds. We're tied together by a sense of community, a common sense of destiny. Right? If you don't like the faith that your rabbi preaches, so you either start another shul, right? Right? Or if you ever belong to a synagogue that has the word emet in the title, that's how it got started. Right? No. This is the natural history of synagogues, right? You start with Beth El, God's place. And then a bunch of people say, we don't like the rabbi, so we're going to start Anshe Emet, people of truth. Beth El, people of truth, Anshe Emet. And that goes on for a few years, and this gets tiring because, people of truth, they just won't shut up, right? So you have a third synagogue, a breakoff, where we want nothing but peace. Beth Shalom. Bethel, Anshe Emet, Beth Shalom. That's how synagogues get started, right? That's the natural history of synagogues. So we can tolerate mysticism because we can tolerate it because there's the things that tie us together besides faith. And if you challenge the authority of the Jewish community, it doesn't matter. You're still part of the Jewish community. So what happens in Judaism, as opposed to other religions, is that, as in other faiths, especially Western faiths, is that unlike other faiths where mystics are persecuted, in Judaism, it's actually the authorities themselves who are mystics. Rabbi Akiva is a mystic. Now, the Talmud says he has his own way, he has his own derech, he has his own religious life when he's leading the community, but when he's by himself, he has a different religious life. Right? The greatest lawyer in all of Jewish history is Yosef Karo, the guy who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He literally wrote the code of law. At night, a magid, an angel would come and take him on flights through the heavens and introduce him to all the angels. I like to know what he was smoking, right? But it's legal now in California, I'm told. So, but this is part of the solidarity of the Jewish community. So we've always had our mystics, okay? In 1492, a small community, but mysticism's always private. It's always one teacher and one student. Right? One teacher, one student. One teacher, two students. But it's always very private, very selective. Because the tradition was very aware of the fact that when you depart from the conventional rationality, when you depart from the common sense, you're literally insane. And if you teach mysticism to people who don't have a grounding in the world, you could literally drive people insane using mysticism. So the tradition was that in order to be a mystic, you had to be 40 years old, you had to be male, you had to be 40 years old, you had to be married, you had to have a mortgage. Important. You had to have a mortgage, and you had to be tied to the world. You had to be learned. I mean, there's a beautiful mystical story. I'm getting off the track here, but there's a beautiful story about a mystic who his wife leaves for the day, and he's in charge of the baby, and the baby's sleeping in the crib. So the mystic goes in, the Jewish mystic goes into his revelries, his meditations and his trance, and he's ascending into the heavens, and he ascends into the first heaven, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. And finally, for the first time in his life, it's the apotheosis of his mystical dreams. He enters the seventh heaven, and he enters the palace of God, and he walks through the hallways, and he comes to the throne room of God, and he's standing face to face with God himself, and the baby starts to cry. No, it's very interesting. And the mystic doesn't know. Should he stay here in his revelries face to face? This is what he spent his whole lifetime training to do, to speak with God, to be one with God. Or does he go back and be the father that he's supposed to be? Right? And God looks at him and says, you better go take care of the baby. And the mystic says, I'm sorry. And God says, no, that's why you're in the world. And he sends him down. I mean, that's a very interesting story, but that's Jewish. You have to be rooted in the world in order to be the mystic, because we don't want you going insane. You rooted in the network of relationships that define you is more important than your personal experience of God. So the mystical tradition was always private and very selective, but in 1492, with the development of the community in Tzfat, you have for the first time a chevra of mystics. I mean, the streets are filled with people doing this stuff. Now, the question they were asking was this basic philosophical question. If God created the world and God is pure and good, How come the world is so evil? How do you have a world so evil that's the creation of a God who is so good? How do you square that? And they could find no answers in the previous traditions. So into this mystical circle in the beginning of the 16th century, the 1500s in Tzfat, comes a young man who really is the Mozart of Jewish mysticism. He's a young man, in his early 30s. He comes in, he spends 2 years in the community, completely revolutionizes Jewish mysticism, doesn't write a thing down. It's all written by his students, and then he dies. He dies very young, right? Remember Tom Lehrer's famous thing, you know, when Mozart was my age, he'd been dead for 10 years, you know? That's sort of the way, this sort of flame, this flame of wisdom. And his name was Isaac Luria. And he was called in the tradition the Holy Ari. The Holy Ari, because he was Ashkenazic Rav Yitzchak, right? And the Holy Ari it comes in and he offers a cosmological myth that answers the question, why is the world the way it is? And the cosmological myth, he says to his students, here's how the world gets created. God is Ein Sof. God is infinity. God is the infinite being, infinite energy, infinite creativity that fills everything. There's nothing but God in the beginning. But God, as it were, develops a desire to have a universe. So God withdraws from a sector and creates a sector of the universe that's not God. That's called tzimtzum, right? That's tzimtzum, pulling inward, pulling away. And into that area that's not God, Ein Sof, God projects a set of structures, the sphirot, and then God animates these structures by beaming energy and light and life into these structures. But then a great accident happens, and there's all kinds of different variations on this myth in the Lurianic lore, but one way or another, the structures exploded. Now, was it because the structures were not built properly? They were not balanced? Was it because God breathed too much light and energy into the world? Was it because of something that people did? No one knows. There's all these different theories. But the world begins in a big bang, an explosion of energy. And the world we live in is the world of the broken shards, the shattered pieces of that great explosion. And we, human beings, have been brought into the world to do the work of tikkun. We are God's repairmen. That's why we're here. We're in the world to put the world back to the structure that it was when it was at the beginning. That is classic Lurianic Kabbalah, 16th century. Everybody got that so far? Okay, now, ready? 17th century. I'll get you there, I promise you. I'll get you to Beshalach. 17th century, the 1600s, for Eastern European Jewry, is one of the worst centuries there was. Close to the 20th century, probably the second worst. First, we're living in Eastern Europe. The majority of Jews now have moved from west to east, and they've settled in Poland and Russia and that area, Ukraine. And you have a peasant revolt that is sparked by a Cossack chieftain by the name of Chmelnytsky. And they revolt against the noblemen. But the nobles of Poland were the ones who were protecting the Jews. So when Chmelnytsky rises up against the nobility and against their taxes, they start slaughtering Jewish communities. So at the beginning of the 17th century, you have this pogrom, this massive pogrom that slaughters hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews of Eastern Europe. Terrible, terrible slaughter. Second thing, out of that misery comes the idea that Messiah is coming. These are Chavlei Mashiach. These are the pangs of the coming of Messiah, the birth of Messiah. And they're looking for a Messiah. Surely this is the beginning of the Messianic age, this kind of horror. And there rises up a strange, charismatic figure by the name of Shabtai Tzvi. Okay, he's a Turkish Jew who is manic-depressive. The classic manic-depressive, right? One dose of Seroquel and he would be fine. But Seroquel won't come along till the 18th or 19th century. So the man's life, when he's in his manic phase, he is wildly charismatic. And he starts preaching, and he has a PR guy named Nathan of Gaza, who starts preaching that he is the Messiah. And people believe him because they want to believe in him. And they follow him. And they sell their possessions and go with him. They're going to go to Eretz Yisrael, and they're going to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and the Messiah will enter Eretz in Jerusalem, and begin the Messianic age, and we want to be there. And they follow him all the way down to the Turkish border. And when he gets to the Turkish border, the Turkish Sultan arrests him and puts him in prison. And then the Sultan wants to get rid of him, but doesn't want to kill him because he doesn't need a martyr. So he says to him, you have two choices. You can either convert to Islam, or I'll kill you. And Shabtai Tzvi is in the right motive, and he decides to convert to Islam. Now, interestingly, by the way, there are some of his followers who rationalize even this, who believe that this is part of his mission to save the... There are still Sabbateans today, by the way, in New York. Well, everything's in New York, but... There are people, because the philosophy was that this was part of his mission to redeem the sins of the world. But most of Eastern Europe goes into a terrible depression. First you have the massacre, and then you have the desolation, the depression of watching the man you thought was the Messiah turn out to be a fraud. It's just this terrible sense of sadness, of depression. And then the third piece of this tragedy is that the rabbis who govern the intellectual and spiritual life of the community, they make a call which is exactly the wrong call. They decide that the reason that there is so much suffering is because our expectations were too high. In order to be disillusioned, you have to have illusions. Right. So if we can stamp out the illusions, then we'll save the people from their disillusionment. And they start engineering a new kind of Judaism, which is ferociously intellectually elitist. It's the yeshiva culture. Yeshiva culture is intellectually elitist. It's this idea that you have to be incredibly pious, incredibly learned in order to be part of the Jewish community. In order to be, not part of the Jewish community, but in order to be close to God. In order to be close to, you got enough room? You want, I got plenty of room over here. I got room galore. Right? Are you sure? I got plenty of room, plenty of room. I mean, this idea that only the wise, only the really adept, only the Talmud scholar gets close to God. The rest of you schleppers, you support a scholar. You find a rabbi that you like and send him all of your... Wait a minute, that's not a bad idea. But this was the idea, so you have the rise of yeshiva culture. But what this does is, instead of healing the desolation, the spiritual desolation of the people Israel, the Jewish people, it makes it even worse, because what you just said was that God can't be reached by ordinary people. So at the end of the 17th century, things are terrible, at least spiritually terrible, for Eastern European Jewry. In the year 1700, Israel ben Eliezer is born. He grows up, and he's not a well-educated guy, but he grows up and he has a certain charisma. And he starts doing sort of magic tricks. And in those days, if you could do magic tricks, and you could heal people from stuff, and you could make amulets and charms and potions and spells, then they gave you a name. They called you a Baal Shem. You use God's name as a good luck charm. Somebody's sick, so you write God's secret name, and you put it on their chest, and bam, they get better. I don't know if you've tried this, but it worked. And so there were a lot of these guys running around doing this, right? You have insanity, we can fix it, whatever you fix the stock market. This guy, however, is extraordinary because he's not just a Baal Shem. He's not just a magician. He actually has a philosophy. And as he reaches adulthood, he begins preaching a philosophy. Now, here's his philosophy. You ready? Remember Isaac Luria a century ago? Remember him? The guy in Sfat, remember? Remember the cosmological myth of Isaac Luria, how the world was created? The Baal Shem Tov, Israel ben Eliezer, Poland, 1700, preaches this idea. Tzimtzum never happened. Stage one, when God pulled out of a sector of the universe, never happened. That was an illusion. Never happened. The world is created in God, of God. God is within all things and all moments. It's a pantheism, panentheism it's called. Everything in the world is in God and of God. Therefore, God is not far away. The idea that you think that God is far away is your problem, not God's. In other words, God's distance is a psychological problem, not a metaphysical problem. The reason why you think God is far away is because you're so depressed. Depression, sadness, this is the thing that separates you from God. Because depression is fundamentally self-serving. I don't know how many of you know this. If you live with people who are, sort of sad and angry and depressed all the time, there's something like, like you say, like, oh, come on, like, do something for somebody. No, it's me, it's all my problems. You ever have a friend like that who takes you to lunch and tells you all their problems? Right? You ever have that friend? Would anybody like that friend? I specialize in such people, No, I'm kidding. That was, but what the Baal Shem says is, break out of your desolation. That's what keeps you from God. God is close to you in all moments and in all things. Now, there are several implications of this. Implication number one, if that's the case, then there is a Torah of the rabbis. The rabbis do know stuff because they've read books. But there's a Torah of the shoemaker, and a Torah of the tailor, and a Torah of children. In fact, children have the best Torah because it hasn't been corrupted by adult mishagas. Go listen to the children. Israel ben Eliezer's job, he was the shamus of the Hebrew school. His job was to take kids to and from school each morning and make sure that every kid found his seat in school. So he spent a lot of time with kids. And he said kids know Torah that adults don't know because it's not corrupted by adult mishagas. Mishagas is a technical, theological term. Right? No, it's true. Number two, you can go to yeshiva and learn God. It's true, yeshiva, because the books contain godly wisdom. But you can also go into the forest and listen to the birds. Because if God is in all things and in all moments, then there is a Torah of the birds and the squirrels and the trees, just like there is a Torah of the yeshiva. Right? That's a Torah too. And third, here's the most important one. This is the one you all know. If God is readily available in all moments and in all things, you should be joyful. And joy is a positive commandment because desolation, depression, sadness is what separates you from God. So if I can get you to dance and to sing and to raise your spirits, you'll feel the presence of God in that moment. That's classic Hasidism. That's classic Hasidism. Now, what it did was it made mysticism available to all peoples. Mysticism is no longer going to be the thing that one Rebbe teaches his kid, his student, his acolyte, his disciple. Mysticism is now something everybody can participate in because everybody can have a personal relationship with God, because everyone can be put on a path to know God is close, because everyone can experience God. So the Hasidic community emphasizes religious experience. It emphasizes personal religious experience and emphasizes the tools of that personal religious experience. Now, that becomes threatening to the religious authorities of the time, because what happens then is you've taken the entire structure of halakha, of Jewish law and tradition, and made it instrumental to something else, namely religious experience. Why do you have all these laws and traditions? In order to enhance your own religious experience. Well, you say, well, but my religious experience is enhanced by a quite slightly different halacha. So the Hasidim begin to mess with halacha. And when they start messing with halacha, that's when my ancestors, the Litvaks, start getting angry at them. I mean, so the classic Hasidic story has a Litvak confront a Hasid. And he says, you Hasidim have no respect for the law. There is a time to daven, a time to pray. And it's your time to daven Shachris and a time to daven Mincha and a time to daven Mariv. And you Hasidim, you pay no attention to these times. And the Chassid says, oh, my brother, you're exactly right. But let me tell you what happens. I wake up in the morning intent on davening on time. I take my talis and my tefillin and my siddur, and I go to the window, and I open up the window. Oh, do you know what happens? The song of the morning fills my room. And I see the sun rising, and I smell the air, and I hear the birds, and I see children on their way to school, and grown-ups on their way to their lives, and I'm so taken by the wonder of the morning that by the time I come back to myself, it's too late. So I say in the evening, I will daven on time. So I take my siddur, and I go to the window, and I open the window. The song of the night fills the room. The sun has gone down, the sky is darkening. I see families gathered at their hearths all over the town. I feel the silence of the land. And it's so beautiful. By the time I come back to myself, I forget to daven. That's what happens. So I think I have a solution. Tomorrow, I'll close the window. And the Litvak says, God forbid, which is how you know it's a Hasidic story, you know. But you see how that story works? The religious experience is preeminent over the structures of ritual, the law, the structure of tradition. Tradition is there as an instrument to bring you to certain kinds of religious experiential moments. That's classic Hasidism. That's why Hasidism and Orthodoxy went to war against each other. Now that's hard for you to imagine today, because today Hasidim are the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox. And there are reasons for that. It changed, it got co-opted, and particularly after the Holocaust, when so many were destroyed by Hitler, it had a profound rebound against modernity. And that's what gives us so many of the images of Hasidism. Why do you dress that way? Nowhere in the Torah does it say you have to wear a long black coat and have a big beard. Right? Well, it's more than they want to. They revere their Rebbe. They revere their founders, and so they dress like their founders. Right? It'd be interesting if we did that in America, by the way. You know, if we were all dressed like Thomas Jefferson. Right? But the idea is that you revere, you want to stop time in 1760. You want to stop time in 1830. So the way you do that is you try to live a life in that moment, and you ignore the fact that the world has changed about you. You don't want to advance. You want to stop at that moment. It's a very interesting strategy. That's an affectation, though. The inner core of Hasidism is this idea of a personal experience. So what you're going to find when we open the books, so they did write books, by the way, and some of the most beautiful are the commentaries they gave on Torah. And what I gave you today was a fourth generation Hasidic commentary on this morning's Torah portion. Okay? Now there's a question or two I saw. Yes, please. We have come bring the microphone over here. We have a microphone so the world can hear you. Okay? Okay? Okay, I need that one. Yeah, thanks. Please, Vaksha.
Okay. First of all,
yeah, it doesn't go on. Just talking to
okay.
it. The world can hear you.
First of all, Rabbi Eddie, I'm delighted to see you. I'm Rabbi Malka.
I know. How
and I'm
are
glad
you?
to be here. And I wanted to tell you, there were two things that came up for me. One is, as you were talking, it seems to me that what you were describing, 500 years after Ramban, is exactly his point, that in the shattering, one thing was never shattered.
Yeah.
And that was the source of the root. And that's
you're going
why
to see
we
that in the
sing.
Sfas Emes
That's
in
what
a
I said.
minute.
That's what I'm saying. It's in the Ramban
Yeah,
you
you're
gave
going to
us.
see him here, yeah.
Right, because he quotes the Ramban. And the other thing is that although I've been a member and part of this synagogue for over 40 years, there are members who may not know that there are neo-Hasids in the world today that are not the guys in the long black coats, but Jewish renewal that Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi began is exactly getting us out of the black raincoats of Poland into the ecstasy that's described in Sfas Emes here.
Yeah, that's very nice. There's neo-Hasidism now. Right. I have this dream, Malka, that one day one of the great Hasidic leaders in Yerushalayim, in your city, is going to wake up and God's going to give him a revelation. And God's going to whisper one word in his ear, pastels. And then you're going to see Hasidim in rose and teal and fuchsia and lemon and avocado, and that's. I said I have a vision that one day the Lord God is going to whisper into the ear of one of the great Hasidic leaders of Jerusalem the word pastels, and you'll see a rainbow of soft Hasidic colors. No, this is important. This is an important thing. Someone else had other questions before we go on. So yes, please. This was all by way of introduction. We haven't gotten to the text yet, but I wanted to know who you're reading.
Hasidics. Is Chabad Hasidic?
Yes.
Okay.
Chabad Hasidism started in Lithuania. That's a problem. Okay? Because Litvaks by nature are ferociously cerebral and somewhat pedantic. And Chabad Hasidism, there were in the third generation of if you start with Baal Shem Tov and then his student, you have a young man named Shneur Zalman who goes to Lithuania and starts a school of cerebral Hasidism. And right? So he's going to do Hasidism, but he's going to try to meld it with the intellectual, cerebral life of the yeshiva. So he calls it there's three, the word comes from, it's an acronym for Chochmah, Bina, Dea. Chochmah means wisdom, Bina means understanding, Dea means knowledge. Now that's already an interesting idea, because other Hasidic masters would say, just feel the presence of God. Chabad said, no, you got to know something. You got to learn something. And he writes a book called the Tanya. The word Tanya means teaching. It means teaching. And he writes, it turns out in its original form was a very, very learned Hasidism. It was a breakaway from some of the Polish Hasidim who were much more ecstatic and much less cerebral. And that's where Chabad originally comes from. Okay? And it has its own personal flavor. What happens, the way you and I know it, is that you had seven Lubavitch rabbis. Lubavitch was the name of the town. And Hasidim are often known, the rabbis are often known by the name of the town they lived in. Satmar is the biggest Hasidic sect in America, in the world today, by the way. They came from a place in, you're going to think this is really funny, they came from a place in Hungary called Satu-Mary, City of Mary, as in the Virgin. Right, in other words, the most Orthodox Jews in the world call themselves after the Virgin Mary. That's the truth. That's where Satmar is the name of the town, and it's like we're City of Angels, Los Angeles, and you have a city here called Santa Maria. Hello. It's the Santa Maria Hasidim, right? That's Satmar. So Lubavitch was the name of the town. So Chabad Hasidism is a flavor of Hasidism, but the rabbi comes from the town of Lubavitch. And this is the seventh. The guy that died some years ago is the seventh one. And he had this idea of spreading Judaism through the world, and that's where you get the system of Chabad houses and centers all over the world. That was a sort of revolution. That was a revolution. Most Hasidim don't want to have anything to do with you and me. Especially after the Second World War, they felt that modernity was a pollutant, and they wanted nothing to do with modernity, so they isolate themselves in certain neighborhoods so they don't have to engage with you and me. Okay? All right, now, we good so far? Everybody good? Haredi, good. The word Haredi means to tremble. Okay? Trembling. That's where the word, right? The name Haredi is the name that was given in Israel particularly to those Jews who wanted to separate from the society and live on their own, away from modernity. And so they're called in English, we use the phrase ultra-Orthodox. Haredi was a word that Israelis used as a pejorative. It was, lunatics is what it really means. And those Jews took that on as a badge of honor. Oh yeah, we're lunatics, all right. Right? And so they call themselves Haredi. So Haredi refers to those sects of Jews, very, very, very religious Jews, both Hasidic and non-Hasidic, for whom the idea of separating themselves from the world and not engaging with the rest of the world is part of their tenet of belief. Okay? Now, my Israeli friends are here, and they will laugh at us because they'll say, yeah, they'll separate themselves from the world until it comes to accepting Israeli government money. And then they somehow compromise and take the money. But they somehow manage to achieve that, right? But that's what, so there's certain businesses, you have to make a living. You've ever been in New York City and walked down 47th Street? Diamonds is a big Hasidic community, enterprise. A lot of the diamonds are traded by the Belzer Hasidim because they had a very big position in Antwerp, okay? And Antwerp, Belgium, which is the big diamond center in the world, and the Belzer Hasidim live on they trade on 47th Street among themselves. It's a very interesting community. There's a lot you can read about them. I just want to get the inside philosophy. All right, so what are we looking at here? Shabbos afternoon, we should try this. Shabbos afternoon, the Rebbe has a farbrengen. The Rebbe has a gathering. Late Shabbos afternoon. All the Hasidim come to be with the Rebbe, the rabbi. Rebbe doesn't mean rabbi. Rebbe is the charismatic spiritual head of the community, and he is invested with supernatural powers, at least say a kind of reverence for his closeness to God. So the Rebbe has a farbrengen, and the whole community comes to listen to the Rebbe, right? So we all sit, we have a tish. Tish means table in Yiddish. We sit at a tish, right? And there's a kugel and a bottle of schnapps, okay? So first we sing a nigun, then we have a little kugel, then we have a schnapps. Then the Rebbe gives a little talk. Then we sing a song, have some kugel, have some schnapps. Then the Rebbe gives another little piece of the shtick. Then we have some more kugel and some more nigun and some more schnapps and some more schnapps and some more Rebbe. And we do this till 3 o'clock in the morning. No, I'm not kidding. This starts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and ends at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Get it? The Rebbe asks one of the Hasidim to be the designated Hasid. He doesn't partake of the schnapps, and he is the one chosen because he has a brilliant memory, and he remembers everything the Rebbe says, and as soon as Shabbos is over, they make Havdalah, he runs home and writes it all down. Right? He writes it all down. He passes it by the Rebbe to make sure he doesn't make any mistakes, and it gets published. Okay? So this book is called Sfat Emet. This is the record of the Rebbe's tishes of the Gera Rebbe. The Gera Rebbe was the rabbi of the Hasidim of Ger, which is a suburb of Warsaw. This was the biggest, most powerful sect of Hasidim in Poland before the Second World War. Okay? Even today, by the way, they're in Jerusalem, and they're a very powerful sect. Right? If you want to go see some very interesting place, there's a street right opposite Machane Yehuda on the other side of Jaffa Road. Don't get hit by the train. And if you walk halfway up the street and look on your right, you'll see a very peculiar building. Buildings in Jerusalem are all built and faced with Jerusalem stone. But there's a building there that's faced with red brick. And you'll say, my God, that doesn't belong. What is it? And if you go look at it, it's the yeshiva of the Ger Hasidim. So they had such an ambition to recreate the community of Poland that they built a facsimile of the yeshiva that was in Poland, in Warsaw, in Jerusalem. And somehow they got a building permit to do this. I don't know how, but they did. And you can see it there. It's a very powerful sect of ultra-Orthodox Jews today in Jerusalem. The Gera Rebbe is the 4th or 5th generation Hasidic master. Okay, this Ger Rebbe, Yehuda Alter Leib of Ger, was born in the 1860s, became Rebbe in the 1870s, and stayed as rabbi until 1905 and his death. Every week he would give a drasha. Every week it would get written down. It got published in a book called Sfat Emet, which means plain truth, simple truth. And a very, very interesting set of Hasidic observations. You got to remember, though, you're not reading lectures. You're not reading an essay. You're reading someone's lecture notes. Someone who's been drinking a little schnapps. Okay? Every now and again, it's funny because he'll put in the text of the commentary, and then he's zocher kol kach, which means, I don't know if I got this right. Right? Was it lo kefiyas seder? This wasn't in the order that he gave it. Which means someone handed him the schnapps, and he did the schnapps. Oh, shoot, I'm supposed to remember. You know, and so you get a little farmish, Epis, right? But you have to sort of reconstruct it, okay? So where are we in the text? If you're in the text of the Chumash, right, what I need you to look at is the beginning of the... We're in Beshalach. I told you we'd get to the Parsha today. Eventually, we always get to the Parsha. Yeah, start on page 399. So what happened at the very end of last week? The very end of last week, the 10th plague comes. Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron to him in the middle of the night, which is unusual. And Pharaoh says, go, get out of my land. Take your kids, take your possessions, take your flocks, and leave. I don't want you here anymore. And then the very last thing that Pharaoh says is, and bless me too. And Moses and the people of Israel take off. So the Parsha this week begins by saying, we went the long way around. right? When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the land of the Philistines, which is the simple way. Take you 2 weeks to get home. The whole thing would have taken 2 weeks, been a much shorter book. Because it was near, but God said the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. This people's not ready yet to be free. That's such an interesting observation. God's going to take them the long way around, not because it's expedient, but because they're not ready yet. This process, as all road stories, is about the internal development of this people's character. We tell stories about roads because it's a symbol of internal development, right? Pilgrim's Progress, Chaucer's Tales, The Wizard of Oz, The Lord of the Rings. These are all stories of the road. They all take place on a journey. It's the most popular metaphor in all of Western literature because the journey, the road, is a symbol of your internal change. It's not that Dorothy has to find the wizard to get home. Dorothy has to find Dorothy to get home. Dorothy has to figure out who Dorothy is. That's the Wizard of Oz. That's the Torah of the Wizard of Oz. And she's met by 3 companions, the mind, the heart, and the will, right? The scarecrow, the cowardly lion, and the Tin Man. Because along the way of life, we're all met by mind and heart and will, and that's how we find our way home. That's the choice. But God says they need the journey. So he's going to take them the long way. And that's why we end up at the Sea of Reeds. We didn't need to end up at the Sea of Reeds. We could have gone past it. But we end up at the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, the Red Sea, because that was the way we needed to go. So this is going to be one of the questions that the Rebbe is going to ask us in a second, okay? So now you get the exciting story. They camp at the sea. Pharaoh changes his mind. And if you ever watch the movie does a midrash at this point. How do you, in the movie, the greatest biblical movie ever made, let it be written, let it be done, right? You know, how does, once Pharaoh's let him go, how does Cecil B. DeMille, the great midrashic Rebbe, tell us that Pharaoh's mind was his heart was hardened and his mind was changed? His wife, who was, I think, Ann Baxter, right, really loved Moses all along, and he knew it. She says to him, "What sort of man are you to let slaves defeat you? Huh, I thought I married a real man." This is Midrash a la masculine, feminine, 1956, right? This is, you know, Aqua Velva. I mean, this is a real man's man, you know? The Marlboro man, right? Yul Brynner does not take a backseat to no one, and nor does he ever own an undershirt, right? Magnificent body, you know? Yul Brynner. And Midrash says, "You're right! Bring me my armor! Bring me my chariots!" Like someone come and remind him, like, you just got schmeiced 10 times by a chick. Let him go. What do you care? You know, you don't need Jewish workers anyway. You know, no, I will fight. And he goes down in his chariot. I love that scene. Right? We're in 402. We'll get to the Rebbe in a minute. 402, verse 8. The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, gave chase to the Israelites. The Israelites departing defiantly, the Egyptians gave chase, and all the chariots. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Now, this is the great part of the Torah. Your life may be on the line. You may have seconds left to live, but there's always time for a good kvetch. There's always, and we may be an inarticulate people under normal circumstances, but when we kvetch, we become Shakespearean. Nobody kvetches. Nobody kvetches with the literary acumen of the Jewish people. Nobody. Listen to this. You're Moses. You really want to be back in Midian tending your sheep with your wife and your kids. You're out here battling these and they come to him and they say to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt you brought us to die in the wilderness?" Anybody aspires to leadership in the Jewish people, read this carefully, okay? It's just what have you done taking us out of Egypt? Isn't this the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, we will serve the Egyptians, for it's better to serve the Egyptians than die in the wilderness? That's the long way around. Now you see why God took them the long way. They're not ready to be free, right? But Moses said to the people, have no fear, stand by, witness the deliverance of the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again, the Lord will battle for you. Now, if you look at the next line is beautiful. God says, why do you cry out to me? Which means there's something missing in the intervening white space, which is what? Moses, having made that glorious, brave speech, then turns around to God and says, what am I going to do? Like, what? Like, you know, what? And God says, why are you asking me? You know, you just made the brave speech, you lead them. You know, God says, why you tell the Israelites to go forward, lift up your hand. And the story you know, he lifts up his hand, let the Egyptians know that I'm the Lord. The angel of God was there. The angel pushed back the Egyptians. The sea opened up. The Israelites crossed through the sea. Wait a minute. We got to the end of that one. Page 405, verse. Thus, I love thus. There's no thus in Hebrew. It's vi. And, but thus, the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. When you put thus in a text, what are you doing? You're rolling the credits. You know, that's the end of the movie, right? Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. When the Israel saw the wondrous power the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses. End of story. Roll credits. Nah. First, we have to have a song that celebrates. So turn the page. This is why it's called Shabbat Shirah. This song is the next song. And the line you need to know is the first line. Az Yashir Moshe Uvenei Yisrael et hashira azot ladonai vayamru lemor. Okay? Now, that's a really weird line in Hebrew. Oz. What does the word Oz mean? That's the Wizard of Oz. I told you it's relevant, right? Okay? Oz means then, and so, thus. It's therefore. It's a weird way to start a story. Oz. It's a connection, and so just hold on to that thought, right? Yashir Moshe. It shouldn't be Yashir Moshe. It should be Shar Moshe. He sang. Yashir is will sing. Et Ashira Hazot. This song, Ladonai, Vayamru Lemor. Ashira Ladonai. The whole thing is in future tense. Ashira Ladonai ki ga'oga'a. I will sing out to God. I will sing. I will sing to God. Okay, everybody see that? Close the book. Take out the page. Ready? Here's the Ger Rebbe. It's Shabbos afternoon. It's about 8 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. You've had some kugel. You've had some schnapps. We've sung a nigun. Here's the Rebbe. Ready? He starts out in a classic form of midrash. Classic rabbinic midrash always started with a verse on the other side of the Bible. So if I want to explain that verse, Az Yashir Moshe, I'm going to start with a verse all the way on the other side of the Bible in Psalms. That's the way classic midrash always worked, and work my way back. Right? See how I work it. The midrash states on the verse, Nachon kisecha me'az, me'olam ata. So there's a verse in the book of Psalms that says, your throne is established me'az, from then. Right? You are the eternal. So first of all, in the book of Psalms it says, your throne is established, you are the eternal, but it has this weird word in it, me'az. What is me'az? From Oz. But we know where Oz comes from, right? It's in our song, right? So the Rebbe's going to connect the Oz of the verse in Psalms to the Oz in the verse of Exodus. Ever see that? Is that clear to everybody? Because if you don't get that, you're going to get lost, right? Even though you are eternal, your throne became established only at the time of Az Yashir Moshe, the time they sang the song. I mean, you're God, but nobody knew it. Why? Because from the time of creation, God's providence was hidden. Because when God created the world, and God put Adam into the world and said, you rule the world, God then stepped back. So nobody in the world knew God. God was hidden from the world. But it's more than that, because you have to understand that whenever a chassid says anything, it's not just in past tense, it's also in present tense. Which means that nature has the power to conceal the work of God in the world. The natural functioning of the world conceals the presence of the divine. Right? Nature, from the time of creation, God's providence was hidden. At the moment of Exodus, it was revealed and became known to the world. Nature hides God's presence. It's the events of our history that reveals God's presence. You need these events to wake up and see what's right in front of you, because otherwise you won't see it. You'll just see the natural workings out of a natural world. Right? This is what is meant by the verse, your throne is established, and why in the Ten Commandments God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, not I am the Lord your God who created you. Because creation conceals the divine. History reveals the divine. So it's only at the moment of singing the song that we said, now I can see something I didn't see before. I can see the workings of the world I didn't see before. Those of you who have been studying with me for a while, you remember the Joseph story? You remember the denouement of the Joseph story when Judah steps in front of him in Vayigash? Remember that? And Joseph says to his brother, don't blame yourselves for sending me here. It was God who sent me here. That's another one of these moments when you suddenly get it, right? It's upstairs history, when you can suddenly see a flow to history that you didn't see in the normal flow of events. The normal flow of events seems random and nuts. It's only when you step upstairs you can say, oh my God, now I can see it. Az Yashir Moshe. What were they really singing about? They weren't singing about the fact that Pharaoh was dead and the Egyptians weren't chasing them. They were singing because they suddenly realized that they are part of a historical drama that they never saw before. And every time we sing that song, which we do every day in shul in the morning, it's to affirm the fact that we are part of a historical drama that might not be evident at all moments. You have to know this. Az Yashir Moshe. This reflects, this is what Rabbi Malka said a moment ago, this reflects the Ramban's answer to Rashi's first question. See, he's playing intellectual elitist here. So Rashi, you know, is the great French commentator of the 11th century who asks, his first comment on Genesis, he quotes a midrash, which asks, why did the Bible begin with Genesis? The Bible should have begun in Exodus with the first mitzvah of the Jewish people. What did he get all this creation stuff for? Right? And the Ramban answered him a generation later, 300 years later, by saying the Torah begins with Genesis because the belief in Genesis, in creation, is the root of all faith. And here's the Rebbe, here's the Gerer. In everything created, there is a point of connection with divinity. Stop. Everything was created by God, right? How did God create stuff? Let there be. That let there be is still in you. That let there be is still in everything. There is a point of connection to the Creator in all things. That's classic Hasidism. A connection that must be developed. That connection can either be developed or it can be suppressed. You have to decide. In everything created, there is also a song of praise to the Creator. Right? The beginning of our prayer book, if you get up really early in the morning and get here before Yossi, right? The first prayer in the service is Nishmat Kol Chai Tivarech Et Shimcha. Everything that's alive breathes a prayer of God, of thanks to God, right? So the verse, right, in everything created, there's a song of praise to the Creator. So the verse, Az Yashir Moshe, then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song. They sang the song that rises from every creature. They didn't make up the song. They simply joined the chorus of all creation. Because creation can see something that we can't. The trees and the frogs and the birds and the animals and the children know something that we grown-ups don't know. That everything owes its existence to God, and therefore everything wakes up in the morning and says, thank you for the gift of life. But we grown-ups, we've gotten used to the fact that we control the world. So we get up in the morning thinking, oh my God, what's the stock market done today? What's the traffic going to be like on Ventura Boulevard? That's our morning. But at certain moments, things happen to you when you wake up in the morning, and instead of looking at the traffic on Ventura Boulevard, you can sing the song of the world. And that's what happened to Bnei Yisrael at the sea. They sang the song of the world. Az yashir Moshe Bnei Yisrael et hashira hazot. They sang the song that rises from every creature. At that moment, Israel joined the world's song and celebrated the living connection with God's life force that renews creation every day. That's a nice idea. Isn't it a nice idea? This connection, says the Rabbi, depends upon human actions. So you have a connection with God. You just don't know it. You have to decide if you want to suppress it or develop it. But it's there all the time waiting for you. Each one of you, each one of us has this personal connection. This personal connection with the life force of the universe. It's pouring into us. When a human being reaches toward God on the basis of the knowledge that all reality is energized by the divine life force, right? Chayut ha'olam is his phrase. Nikudah ha'pnimit, this inner point with the life of the universe. This understanding enlightens one's actions. If you remember during the course of a day that you are connected to the Creator and given the task of adding life to the world, you'll behave in a different way than if you walk around saying, I am a self-made person and it's all about me. This is how you defeat the ego. You forget that you're plugged in, right? It's really easy to think that you're an independent creature, but you're actually plugged into the wall. You're always plugged into God, okay? All confusion is alleviated. The Song of the Sea celebrates the faith that everything is connected to the source and the root, shoresh, right, v'makor, which is the life, divine life force. This is the faith that brought forth the song. And so it was established that the song will be read every day in our daily prayers so that a human being might awaken the song within all creation. And so too on Shabbat. Remember, he's giving this drasha Shabbos afternoon, so he has to always bring it back to Shabbos. On Shabbos, we sing Shiru Ladonai, we sing Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, right? Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat. So Moses sings Az Yashir Moshe B'nei Yisrael, right? Ashira Ladonai Ki Ga'o Ga'a. And on Friday afternoon, we sing Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat. So the word shir is in common, right? What is a shir? A shir is a song. What is a shir really? What is a song really? A song is when you open yourself up to realize that you are part of the larger life force of the world and part of the larger drama of God in the world. And that's what a song represents. That's what you need to know in order to sing the song. On Shabbos, to bring the holy light of Shabbat into the weekday. So on Shabbos, you get this extra measure of song. Because on Shabbos, it's easy to walk around feeling like I'm part of something alive. It's much harder on Monday. Right? On Shabbos, you can get up a little bit later, and you can sleep a little bit, and you eat another piece of challah. And it's a machaya. Machaya is a nice word. It comes from the word chai. You're full of life, right? But on Monday, it's cold coffee and bad toast and work. So what are you going to do? You're going to bring a measure of Shabbos song into your Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. For this is the purpose of Shabbos observance. Why the Midrash teaches that if all Israel kept but one Shabbos, they'd be redeemed. For when Shabbos is mentioned in the Torah portion, it mentions the other 6 days as well. All right, everybody, sing a song. Die, 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 die. Have some kugel, right? Drink a schnapps, l'chaim. Come on, okay? Here's another one. Ready? Here's another one. Why is the miracle of the splitting of the sea part of the Exodus? That's a really beautiful klutz kasha. I mean, it's a really beautiful, like, if God took us out of Egypt, why did he take us to the sea? Why did we need that episode? What was liberated at the sea that wasn't liberated back in Egypt? You understand the question? You see the question? You could have told the story without the episode of the sea. Yeah, we got out of Egypt, we crossed the desert, we got to Israel. Done. Why do you need this? Right? Why do you need this in the story? Why does this need to be part of the story? Watch. The oppression of Egypt was hard physical labor beneath the cruel authority of the Egyptians. Because of these labors, the Israelites lost the faith that God's redemption was within their capacity. What was the worst part of the cruelty of Egypt? We lost our sense that we could be redeemed. No, listen to this. This is really important, especially today. Martin Luther King writes a letter to the Black Ministers Association of Birmingham, Alabama. He writes it on toilet paper because that's all they gave him in the jail when he put him in jail. They jailed him because he was part of the bus boycott. And when the bus company started going bankrupt, they jailed King. So he finds himself in the Birmingham jail, and the ministers don't back him. So he writes a letter called Letters from the Birmingham Jail. You can find it online. It's not too long. It's worth reading this weekend. And what does he say to them? You guys have forgotten that you could be free people. You guys have forgotten the dignity that is due you as a human being. You have been oppressed so long and so cruelly. This is what King says to his black minister friends. You have been oppressed so long. You have gotten used to the cruelties of segregation. You've become accustomed to this slavery. The worst part of slavery is when a slave forgets that he's a slave. And he thinks this is normal. This is natural. And King says to his colleagues, you have come so accommodated to the rigors, the horrors of segregation and prejudice and discrimination and hate that it doesn't bother you anymore. And that's why you're not here with me, because it bothers me. The worst part of Egypt was that we no longer believed it was possible for us to become liberated. We liked our slavery. We kissed our chains. That's the worst thing. So what happens? Their labor so infected their bodies that we became bodies without souls, basically. We became bodies without spirit, because anybody with any soul would want to rise up and be free. But we accommodated, and we assimilated, and we internalized the slavery, and we became the slaves that the Egyptians wanted us to become. Therefore, once they left Egypt, God commanded them to turn back toward Egypt and camp outside the Red Sea. When God sees this, God knows that there's one more step to our liberation that has to happen. You can't just take the people out of their physical slavery. There's something else that has to happen. What else has to happen? You've got to regrow a soul. So God, it says, Vayachanu, they turned around. He turned them around and sent them back toward Egypt, back to the Red Sea, because there was one more step in this liberation process, right? Because Israel needed to experience the joy of God's redemption. I can't even just tell you about redemption. You've got to taste it. You've got to experience it. You've got to know it. You have to be there. I'm going to change you. So God turned them back toward Egypt, and they followed the commandment with love, and they turned back. I mean, imagine that. You're on your way out of Egypt, and the command comes, turn back. I mean, why would you want to do that? But they did it. They followed Moshe, and they turned back, and they camped at the sea. Then it's written as they cried out. That was that section we saw, right? They cried out because they saw that they were coming under the cruel power of the Egyptians once again. They cried out to God, for only God could save them. Because they saw there was no natural way to be saved. There was no escape. You had Pharaoh behind you and the sea in front of you. You were going to die. God put you in a position where you were going to experience one last near-death experience. That's the only way that you were going to learn that you could be redeemed. So the whole experience of Egypt is sort of compressed in that moment by the sea when you see Pharaoh behind you and the sea in front of you. You have no out, no choice. And what happens? Right? They cried out to God, only God could. Therefore, the sea says, the verse says about the splitting of the sea, thus the Lord saved Israel that day. Redemption came to reality only because they repaired themselves and genuinely believed in the possibility of redemption and so pursued the miracle. Now, what does that mean? If they're really slaves, and they're standing there between the sea and Pharaoh, and Moses holds his arm, and the sea splits, what would they do? They would stay there. If nothing, they would actually turn back and go back to the Egyptians. They would go back toward the Egyptians, right? They would give up. They would surrender themselves to the Egyptians. Why didn't they surrender themselves to the Egyptians? I mean, think about this a minute, right? Pharaoh's army's coming. So what you do is you surrender. You're a slave. You're used to surrendering. That's what you do. You subservient. You get on your knees, you put your head down, and you say, take me back. Why did they go forward into the sea instead of going back toward the Egyptians? Why did they do it? Something woke up in them. Tiknu. Tiknu. This is a tikkun. Something awoke in them that told them they could get away. The slave has to believe he can get away. He has to believe he has a right to get away, that he's actually a free person temporarily incarcerated. Tiknu, right? And they pursued the miracle. They needed to internalize the miracle. So what's the biggest miracle of the sea? The biggest miracle of the sea isn't some magic trick where the ocean opens up. What's the biggest miracle of the sea? You change the heart of people. You change people to believe that they have a right to be free. They have a right to be free. They have a need to be free. They have a possibility of being free. That's the biggest miracle. And that's why at the end of the song it says, Vayaminu b'Adonai, they believed in God. The miracles God performs for us lift us out of the physical reality of the natural world. That's why God chose us as God's witnesses, to testify that God overcame nature in the events of the Exodus and giving of the Torah. But the nature here is not that the sea split. That's an easy miracle. That's a wind. The real miracle is that you can turn enslaved human beings into free human beings. That's the real miracle. This is the truth to which we testify, a truth that derives from faith. Okay, sing a song. Die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Everyone have a little kugel. Have some kugel. Have a schnapps. L'chaim. Okay, you getting in the mood now? And you can see that the longer you go in the Farbrengen, the more schnapps and kugel you've had, the less coherent it needs to be. Right? Let's just read the end of this one, right? This is the last one. The song and the attachment to God have been implanted in the Jewish soul forever. Right? That's why it says, Az Yashir Moshe. Yashir means they will sing. This wasn't a song once and for all. This is the perennial song of the people, of this people. This is our song, sung all the time. Why? But until the Exodus, we weren't able to call it forth. Right? If you look up, it says, never be forgotten by the soul of Israel. Right? On this, the longing for God was revealed. Of this, Scripture says, our soul has escaped like a bird from the hunter's trap. In Egypt, our very desire was imprisoned. Release my soul from prison. So it is every Shabbos that the soul and desire are set free. This is why Shabbos is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. And we say, Tov Lahodot L'Adonai in the Song of the Sea. Every Shabbos, you get a little bit of that seaside sickness, that seaside ambition to be just a little freer now. Just a little more free. So what did the Rebbe do? He did two things. Number one, he took a story about a historical moment, and he said it's not about the historical moment, it's a statement about all moments. Do you see how that works? This is a statement not about a historical moment, about the condition of being human. And he takes a story about them there that time and makes it us now here. He reads Torah in the present tense. It's not about a bunch of slaves leaving Egypt standing at the sea 3,000 years ago. It's about the struggle to believe every single day that you can be free. And never to give in to the world's message that you're a slave and there's no way out. It's the constant struggle to liberate the human heart and to accept the blessing and gift of freedom. He makes it here and now and us. That's classic Hasidism at its very, 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 very best. Okay, before we finish, this week a wonderful religious poet named Mary Oliver passed away, and Rabbi is going to read us a poem from Mary Oliver.
Thank you.
Oh, we need a microphone. Just put this in. Just in her memory, a beautiful poem, please.
But it connects in
Yeah.
this way. First,
Everything connects.
I apologize for my sunglasses, but you were on fire today,
Oh.
and I needed protection from your brilliance. You really were. But the tragedy of that teaching is that that entire tradition, on the verge of the Nazi invasion of Poland, led all of the followers of the Hasidic tradition to oppose the Zionist claim that they had to get out.
Yeah.
And they stayed and they died.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the transcendental needs to surrender to the historical. Mary Oliver was my favorite poet, and it connects to a midrash about this Parsha. Strangely, she died on this week because my favorite midrash of all the rabbinic midrashim is from Shmot Kaf Dalet Aleph, which is Exodus Rabbah, the classic collection of Tannaitic midrashim. And so it tells a story there about the two Jews, Reuben and Shimon, not the sons of Jacob, but others, two others by that name, who did not see the miracle of the sea. And they raised the question in the Midrash, how is it possible that you could go through the sea and not see that it was a miracle? And they say because the bottom was filled with mud. And all they saw was mud because they never looked up. And that is actually the theme of Mary Oliver's poems, that attention is the beginning of devotion. And it was her strange connection through nature to her Christian faith that informed most of her poetry, all of her poetry. Her greatest poem, I think, is the only one that doesn't have to do with nature. I ask you to look it up. It's called The Journey. A little long to read now, but I wanted to say that she wrote in her poem, When Death Comes, her own eulogy, her best eulogy. When it's over, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. May she rest in peace.
Sergio, thank you for your work.